Okay, students, well, happy chapter number 3. We're going to talk about digestion, absorption, and metabolism. Now, those words may sound kind of boring, but they're super important. Okay, so this is one of our longer chapters in the sense that you need to grasp a lot of the foundational principles that we're talking about when we talk about digestion and absorption, right? Because think about it, if we eat food, we put it into our body, unless our body can process it or digest it and then absorb it, which means spread it out to all the different organs and parts of our body that need it, it doesn't do us any good. So digestion, absorption is really, really, really important. So I want to make sure that you spend time reading this chapter or going through these PowerPoint slides on your own again. Again, I'm going to be brief in my conversation, but I want to make sure that you're grasping some of the big principles that we need to get here. So again, digestion and absorption. Basically, you are what you eat. We know this to be true. So if your diet is an extremely fat-heavy or sugar-laden diet, you don't exercise or do anything physical, we know that you're going to have not only some health complications, but excess weight, right? So the food choices we make greatly affect our body. And so understand that, but I've included a little link here at the bottom of this slide. It's a short little video, and it visually kind of shows the process of digestion and absorption. Again, many of us are visual learners, so I wanted to give you a chance to kind of look at that after we're done here and see what that looks like, okay? All right, so again, our body is made up of lots of different organs. Think of our heart, think of our lungs, think of our kidneys. All of these are different organs, and those organs function in a system. So kind of like they work together as a group. And as a group, they can achieve what the goal is that they need to achieve. So we have a nervous system, respiratory system, urinary system, reproductive, cardiovascular, lymphatic system, muscular system, skeletal, endocrine, integumentary, and digestive. So we're going to talk about the digestive system primarily right now for chapter number 3. But, you know, for those of you who are thinking of the nursing program and thinking of jobs in the healthcare field, this is what you need to kind of understand about the human body. You'll talk more about it in anatomy and physiology. So digestion and absorption. The most important role that the digestive system plays is digestion and absorption. So what this system does is it helps to what we think of as break down or digest our food and then transfer our food or absorb the food. So this system is really, really, really important when we're talking about nutrients, when we're talking about the foods that we eat. For everything we eat and drink, it needs to be broken down into smaller parts and then absorbed into our body, right? If you look on the right-hand side of this slide here, you're going to look and you're going to see atoms, and you're going to know that atoms are really the smallest kind of chemical that we can break down. They're the tiniest particles there are. And atoms are formed together to create these molecules. Molecules then come together to form the different cells that we have in our body. Cells can then be put together to form tissue, right? Muscle tissue and various tissues in our body. Tissues can then come together to form organs, so to form your kidneys or to form your liver. Organs then work together in what we call an organ system, such as your cardiovascular system, right? And then, of course, those organ systems work together to form us, or a living organism. And that's the process of what we're looking at. So understand for the exam, you'll want to know that when we talk about the simplest arrangement the simplest arrangement of our different molecules, it's really atoms being the smallest, moving on to molecules, moving on to tissue, moving on to organs, right? So that's the process, or the simplest flow there, if you will. Right, so organ systems of the body, again, you're going to see most of our systems work together here. The digestive system. So these are the different functions of the digestive system. It digests food, which means it basically is breaking it down so it can be absorbed, right? Absorption, or transferring those nutrients into our bloodstream or into our body. the primary site where absorption happens is the small intestine. And we'll look at what that physically looks like in a minute. But basically, remember, the small intestine is where most of the action or the work of absorbing the nutrients into the body occurs. What we call the GI tract, which is really the gastrointestinal tract, the GI tract is this long, think of a pipe that starts basically at your mouth, right? So when you ingest food, you start at the mouth. So you ingest food, it's going to travel throughout this long, it's 30 feet long, I think in total. So 30 feet long, it's going to go all the way starting at the mouth and ending at the anus. So when we excrete our feces, basically we're getting rid of excess product or nutrients that our body could not absorb or toxic nutrients, right? And so that is the GI or gastrointestinal tract. Transit time. So transit time means how long does it take food to go from your mouth where you first put the food or it enters the body, coming all the way through your system out your anus. And what is transit time? And what we learn or understand is that the heavier or fattier food that you're eating, it's going to stay in your stomach longer. So if you had one day you had for lunch, you had a awesome fruit salad, or you had a wonderful salad with some vinaigrette dressing on it, pretty healthy salad, right? It is going to go through your system or through your GI tract quicker than if you had lunch and you had McDonald's. So if you went to McDonald's and you had a Big Mac and fries and a soda, that is fatty food, processed food, and it is going to sit inside of our GI tract longer than would food that is more natural in state and not as fatty. Okay, that's transit time. And then again, I said our feces play an important role in our body because they get rid of the things that we don't want to hold on to. So your digestive system, organs, and the gut wall. So again, take time to read and understand. But if we look at this picture, you can see here how that GI tract starts at the mouth and it goes down, or what we call here is your esophagus. And it's going to go into your stomach. It's going to go through your small intestines, your large intestines, and finally be excreted from your body. But this is like a lot of area to travel, right? So I want you to look at this and understand. We're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the parts of this, but not maybe everything. So our digestive secretions and hormones, basically what we're saying here is there's several different, what I think of as helpers. They're aids. And what these aids or helpers do is they help to provide maybe juices, or they help to provide different chemicals that are going to help break down food and process food or keep food flowing through your GI tract, right? So these are like the helpers, right? Our mouth. So again, we said food starts at our mouth, right? And what we call the cephalic stage is when we first sense by sight or smell food. So just the other night, I was making one of my family's favorite meals for dinner. We are carnivores, so we're not vegans, but we like meat. And so I was making a Saturday or Friday night, we usually have a tri-tip dinner with some starch and some vegetables and things like that. And my daughter happened to have plans and she was going to go out for the evening. But she walked into the kitchen and she was like, oh my goodness, Mom, that smells so good. No, I know I'm going to go eat somewhere else, but I so want to eat that because the smell is making my mouth water. Right? That's what food does for us, right? When you think of your favorite meal, or even if you've had lunch and then you go home and your mom or your grandma or your caregiver has made one of your favorite dishes and you smell it when you walk in the house. Even though you're full, you want to eat again because the smell is so tempting, right? So our mouth is the entry point for our foods, right? And we're going to see that our saliva plays a really important role. So once we kind of get this cephalic stage of seeing or smelling food, knowing food's coming, our mouth starts to water. And those are our saliva and gastric juices that are going to break down that food. So what I tell people is it's really, really important to understand that chewing your food plays a really important role. Because chewing your food properly, for the correct amount of time, I should say, helps to break down the large particles into smaller particles, and that is so much more useful for when it when you swallow it and it gets into your stomach and eventually into your small intestine. The larger your pieces are, if you don't chew enough, it's more work, if you will. It's more of a challenge, more work for your stomach and your small intestine to try to break those particles down with bile and gastric juices. And so chewing is really important, right? I have my 16-year-old son who just, what I say, inhales his food. Again, he eats a lot of calories per day. But when we sit down for dinner, he is done in 2 seconds. I turn around and the food's gone. And I'm like, you need to chew your food. Chew properly, swallow, don't inhale, because it's just more work internally for your body. So this is kind of what happens when we first put food into our stomach. And again, I'll just kind of back up and mention real quick here. Be careful when you chew without food coming, because sometimes I tell students, let's say you didn't have breakfast in the morning and you're going to school or you're going to work, right? And you want to make sure your breath doesn't smell. You chew some gum, some mint gum, right? So what happens is, if you didn't have breakfast and you chew some mint gum, when you start chewing your gum, you signal to your body, your brain actually signals to your body, start making gastric juices in the stomach, because food is coming, because you are chewing. And so by chewing, you tell the body food's going to come, get ready with that bile and acids to break the food down. So what happens is when you chew gum, no food actually comes. And then that bile and those acids kind of stay in your stomach without having anything to break down. So it's never good to start that kind of chewing process unless you've had a meal. You can chew gum after you've had a meal, no problem. But if you haven't had any food in your system and then you chew, again, you're going to kind of have that unprocessed bile and gastric juices. So here we go on this picture here. So you chew your food good, very well. What happens is all that food turns into what we call this blob, or I call it a blob, called a bolus. And this bolus is like a big clump of food here. And this bolus is now going to travel down your esophagus, down this tube, to get to your stomach. In order to do that, it has to pass right here through what we call this pharynx. The pharynx is interesting because the pharynx is this little, like, think of it as a flap. And the pharynx closes and opens. When we're not eating, the pharynx is closed to our mouth and it's open to our lungs. And so this is how air comes and goes, right? When we go to swallow food, what happens is it closes off the pathway to our lungs, to our respiratory system, and it allows the food to pass straight back and down, right? Have you ever had, I'm sure all of us have had situations or an encounter where you went to drink something and you drank too fast and all of a sudden you were like, you were coughing and you said, oh, it went down the wrong tube. This is why. The pharynx, what happened in that case, the pharynx was not completely open or closed, and that liquid went into your respiratory system, into your lung, which caused you to kind of cough and cough, kind of like, and that's where that pharynx plays a really important role of making sure that our food or the air is going in the right place, right? All right, then again, we've swallowed that bolus. It is now going through what we call the esophagus, your throat. This throat area and this tube that continues down until it reaches the stomach. And there's actually this process, what we call peristalsis. And peristalsis is when our muscles kind of like contract and they push. And so you can see here what's happening is your muscles are pushing this bolus or this food and making it go down your tube to eventually reach this stomach, which is kind of this, think of it as this like holding area, or this place where we're going to start the process of trying to break food down and break it apart. So it's like a big, pot or holder, and you're going to mix up your food in here. The stomach is really tough. It's got 3 different layers. It's really strong because it's got to do the work of kind of punching out or breaking food down, and it's using, remember again, the bile and the gastric acids and juices to break that food down. Right? As I said, the lining of your stomach is really tough because it has to be, right? It's got acid inside of it, and so it's got to be thick enough to be able to handle that. So motility is really, again, this process of how we're getting that food processing or moving. And as I mentioned here before, when we are going to eat, your brain signals your mouth and your saliva glands and everything to start processing, and it signals your stomach, and it says, hey, get those bile and gastric juices going, because food is going to come down, and we're going to need to break it up, digest it, break it up in the stomach, and then we're going to need to absorb it in that small intestine. We're going to kind of see what that looks like here. Right, so here's a small intestine. It's amazing. The small intestine is actually like 20 feet long. So if you know, it looks like it's all like wiggly, zigzaggy, but if you were to straighten it out and pull it, it is 20 feet long, all rolled up in this area inside of you. And so that's a long tract. And it's broken up into 3 different parts, but basically you just need to know this is where a big part of the absorption happens. So again, we have to break our food down to digest it, and then we have to get it to go from being in the small intestine to getting to be the rest of our body. And we'll talk about like how that happens. Okay. Your gallbladder, liver, and pancreas play important roles in this process because they are the ones providing the bile, the gastric juices, the enzymes, kind of like more helpers, if you will, more aids to break our food down, right? So those organs play a really important role. All right, so looking at digestion here, we can see 3 different colors and 3 different processes. And I hope you can kind of start to figure out these are related to our 3 different nutrients, or what we call macronutrients, and how they're broken down. So if we look at the red, we see our starches, our sugars, and our fiber. And this is going to be, hope you can guess it, our carbohydrates, right? Our carbohydrates is our starches. And this, in this case, we're going to see most of our carbohydrates ends up being our sugars, right? And this is how food is kind of broken down and processed. If we look at the blue group, we see these polypeptides, which are broken down into amino acids. Whenever you hear the word amino acids, you're going to be talking about protein, right? You're going to be talking about most of the protein, animal or plant-based, is going to be broken down into these amino acids, which are going to have a function and a role in our body also. And then when we look at the yellow section, we're looking at this large lipid droplet. Well, again, the word lipid gives it away there, right? Here we're talking about our lipids, or our fat. And these fats are broken down into what we call fatty acid chains, which are then absorbed into the body. And so, like I said, if we eat food, but we don't actually digest it or absorb it, then it's not useful to us. There are certain people that have medical diseases and conditions in which their body cannot do this. It cannot either digest or absorb the food, and they have to do some special things to aid the body with that. So that was digestion. Now we're talking about absorption. So absorption means that we need to take these particles and get it into our bloodstream or into our lymph node system. Those 2 things will then carry the nutrients to all of our cells, our tissue, our organs. Without this process, without our nutrients being absorbed, it doesn't help us, right? Because if we can't get it into where it needs to go to our lungs and our liver and our various tissues and cells. If we can't get the nutrients there, we're in trouble. And so this process, or I should say 4 different processes, is how absorption happens, right? Your book has a nice, really not too long of a section on this. I'm not going to kind of go through everything here. Basically, our fatty acids, or in the first one, we're looking at simple diffusion. This is just a really simple process in which it doesn't take a lot of energy for the nutrient to cross the border or barrier into our bloodstream or into the lymph node system. Okay? Osmosis is a process which requires water. So in this case, the nutrients need to be accompanied by water in order to be processed or absorbed into our system. Right? The third one is what we call facilitated diffusion, which means it needs some help. So what you see right here, we have a helper cell that is actually going to kind of go with this nutrient to help it to cross the border. And the last one, which typically refers to our protein, the last process is what we call active transport. And this one needs the most work or the most energy to get it to cross that barrier or that border. It actually needs cells to carry it, to carry the nutrients and to get it across, right? It can't happen by itself. It requires a lot of energy for that to happen. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all the 4 processes, but again, there's a good section on your book for that. So let's continue on talking about the different organs. The large intestine is actually smaller than the small intestine, right? It's only 5 feet long compared to 20 feet long of the small intestine. The large intestine is 5 feet long. The purpose or goal of your large intestine is basically, it is the place where we store all the stuff that we don't want in the body, right? So unabsorbed food, residue, or toxins, things of that nature that we're going to excrete from the body, they're held. Think of, like a septic tank or a little garbage bin there that we're going to get rid of, right? All right. Intestinal microbiota. Basically what we're saying here is we need to have some good microorganisms inside of our gut or stomach, even our colon. All of those areas need to have, think of good bacteria. Yay, good bacteria. We need those things to help us process all of our food. And we've heard a lot, about things like probiotics and stuff like that. And that's what we're talking about. As you can see from this slide here, when we have a healthy gut or stomach environment, right, what happens is we don't have any of this unhealthy bacteria. It doesn't cross into our system, right? This is good. We want that. If you look on the right side, we have a altered gut environment, meaning it's not as healthy. You see how the cells here, right here, are not as uniform as over here. And what happens is in this environment, this is how we can have one of those unhealthy bacteria cross over, and now we get sick. Now we get an inflammation, we get a virus, we have all kinds of problems, right? And yes, things such as probiotics, prebiotics, both of these, they go into our colon and into the parts of our stomach and our GI tract. And what they do is they help produce healthy, good bacteria, the stuff we want. Okay, so they are good. Again, if you're looking at which ones to buy, you're always going to want to buy what we call live probiotics. Usually they have to be refrigerated, and these are going to be the most helpful kind for you. The GI, remember we talked about the gastrointestinal tract, which starts at your mouth here and ends at your anus, right? It's about 30 feet long in total. The GI tract, it plays important roles, as I said, for making sure that we try to limit toxins and other organisms that are bad, which is, if you think of things like food poisoning, that's what we're talking about, right? Trying to keep those out. The immune system's response to fighting foreign substances. So, these are 2 different cells that we all have in our body. And what they do is they look to attack those little bad guys. So think of it, these are our warriors, right? Our frontline defense. They're looking to, when they see an ugly cell or a bad cell that shouldn't be in our body, they go to try to attack it and hopefully, conquer. That's the goal. Some of the common digestive problems that we have, heartburn. So if you look at the picture here, you can see heartburn happens when I mentioned to you that our stomach produces this bile and these gastric juices and acids to break down food. So we have all of that inside of our stomach. And so what happens with heartburn is this little flap allows some of those juices or acids to come back up our esophagus. And when you have heartburn, it feels like it's high up and it feels like, oh, it hurts, right? And this can frequently happen if we have had a large meal. Basically, you overstuff your stomach. So think of it, your stomach is only a certain size. If we overstuff that stomach, then there's a possibility of this opening, allowing these gastric juices and acids to come back up the esophagus, which then burns. Right? The esophagus should not have any type of gastric juices or bile or anything like that in it. And so it burns, and that's really what causes that feeling. Right? Other common digestive problems, gallbladder, pancreas, right? Some of us, myself, I've had my gallbladder removed. So as we get older, sometimes those becomes an issue with absorbing nutrients. Your gallbladder doesn't function the same as it used to, and it has a problem absorbing certain nutrients, and so it's better to get rid of it. Diarrhea happens a lot of times when we basically have foreign substances or viruses. Our body is like, let's get rid of all that, right? Constipation usually happens when we don't have enough fiber in our diet or in our system. So again, we're constipated, which is not a healthy thing to do. If we're eating healthy and we're eating well, we have very regular bowel movements, which is a good sign. Peptic ulcers are, again, these are when you have some actual open sores in the lining of your esophagus or your stomach. Stress has been shown to be a factor when we talk about ulcers, right? But they're basically different types of infections. All right, so what happens if we have patients who cannot eat food normally? Or let's even say we had people who were anorexic or had an eating disorder or had conditions where you are unwilling, maybe not willing to eat the food, or for some reason you cannot eat the food. There's two ways that we're going to have to provide nutrients, because most of us understand that we can't live without nutrients, right? So our patients, we're either going to do what we call an external feeding tube. We're going to take a tube, and typically we're going to put it up your nose. Then we're going to process it down your back of your throat, down that esophagus. We're going to go directly all the way into the stomach. And so we're going to take kind of like Ensure or NutriSure, different liquid nutrients in a liquid form, and we're going to pour it basically so that it goes down this tube, and we're skipping the step of chewing, of breaking down, and we're swallowing all of that. We're skipping it, and we're going right into the stomach. Not a good feeling for a patient, right? So this is not a good feeling. However, it is a way to make sure that we get the necessary nutrients into a patient. If that is not going to work, or if it's going to take too much time and we need to get nutrients into someone ASAP, we're going to do what we call a TPN, which basically is, I'm just going to hook you up with an IV. We're going to give you all of your nutrients in kind of a liquid or saline form, and we're going to put it directly into your bloodstream. Right? So again, think of, hooking up an IV, putting a needle into your vein, and then your vein is going to carry all those nutrients to the rest of the body, right? Neither one pleasant, but we need to make sure that we get nutrients to our patients. And understand that the requirements for our nutrients and our digestive system change throughout life. When we're pregnant, we go through different stages. Your body is creating new life and gaining maybe 28 or so pounds. So it's going to go through lots of different stages. It's going to give you lots of different issues, right? Whether that be morning sickness, heartburn, constipation, because it's trying to digest and absorb and feed two people instead of just one. Young infants cannot process solid foods. They live almost solely on mother's milk or on formula or liquid diets of that sort. Similar to toddlers, toddlers don't have all of their teeth, and toddlers cannot have, a lot of hard solid foods, right? You don't give your 1-year-old a hot dog, right? We don't do that because of fear of choking, because they cannot actually chew that up, right? So we do a lot of soft food diets for our toddlers. And then as the life cycle goes around and we come to our later years, we lose some of the senses we had, the sense of taste and smell and that type of thing. We often lose our natural teeth, and we might have some artificial teeth there. And so we might tend to go also more for a soft diet because of our stage in later life, right? So changes throughout life. So why is the cardiovascular system important to nutrients? Okay, so I'm trying to be really simple and break this down. So think about it. Our heart, right, pumps blood, right? Our veins go to the heart, and the heart then pumps blood out our arteries. So it's like a cycle, right? What we know is that, remember, as we've digested nutrients and now our body has absorbed them, they're now in the blood system, the bloodstream. Now our heart is crucial in pumping that blood to all of our organs and all of our cells so it gets the nutrients we need And as it goes to those places, what's going to happen with your arteries is it's going to pick up and take away all the bad stuff, all the toxic stuff in our cells, all the things we don't want there. This is how we exhale CO2, carbon dioxide, right? So it's going to get rid of all the bad stuff too. So our cardiovascular system is crucial, because without the blood delivering the nutrients, doesn't do us any good. We need that to happen. Right. Let's see, metabolism. So what is your metabolism? Sometimes you hear people say, I have a high metabolism, I have a slow metabolism. Essentially, metabolism is the sum of the chemical reactions that occur inside of your body. I like to think of it as the way that our body takes food and converts it to energy, right? Because we need energy to make everything work, as I mentioned before. So that's our metabolism. And yes, genetically, some of us have slower or faster metabolisms, and our metabolism changes as we age, right? But that's what that is, right? We need this to happen. We want our food to convert to energy, which is what we call this ATP process, because we need that energy to make everything work, right? And this is what it is, the ATP process. I'm not going to go through kind of explaining all of this, but understand when we talk about nutrition, as we mentioned, there's some chemistry involved, because we're talking about different bonds, different chemical reactions that happen. And with ATP, what happens is when there is this particular chemical reaction, it releases energy, and we then go and use that energy, whether it is to make our kidneys continue to function and process waste, whether it is to make our legs run a marathon, whatever it is, we need energy for everything that we do. And again, you kind of see how this is happening, right? With the 3 different macronutrients, our starch is our glucose, our lipids or our fats is our fatty acids, and our protein is our amino acids. And all 3 of those kind of work. We'll use them in different ways to get the energy and nutrients we need. So how do we get rid of stuff we shouldn't have in our system or don't want in our system, right? So the elimination of metabolic waste is done by the kidneys. So the kidneys is the organ that filters out all of this stuff that we don't want, right? This is why we all cannot live without at least 1 kidney, right? You can live with 1. We all have, hopefully most of us are born with 2, but we need at least 1. And this is why we see a lot of our patients on dialysis, a lot of our diabetics and other patients that need to go on dialysis. What happens in dialysis is we're hooking you up to a machine that takes your blood, all blood in your body, it takes it out, it sends it to a machine. The machine then does what your kidneys would normally do, and it cleans your blood. It goes through and processes, it gets rid of toxins and all the bad stuff. It cleans the blood, then it sends that clean blood back into your body. And that's why patients sit there for hours hooked up to a machine at dialysis, because that's what dialysis is doing, and they need it. They cannot live without it, because those toxins will overcome us and kill us if we don't have a way of filtering that stuff out. Hopefully, if we have 2 healthy kidneys, then that is what their job is. Their job is to eliminate all the toxic and waste and what we call metabolic waste, the stuff that we don't want. It gets rid of. So very important function of our kidneys. All right. So which of the following is true about digestion? Sugars eaten are eliminated in feces. Proteins are broken down into sugars. Most carbohydrates are broken down into sugars. Fiber found in foods is broken down into sugars. So the answer is what? I hope you said C, right? Because we've talked about our carbs, most of our carbs are going to be broken down into sugar, or we'll talk about glucose and how that happens, right? Which one of the following meals will leave the stomach the quickest, right? A high carbohydrate meal, a high protein meal, a high fat meal, a high calorie meal. All right, which one do you think it is? Okay, I hope you said A. Right? Our carbs are our quickest source of energy. They are. So, and when we eat carbs, that's why, again, we have what we call carb loading for athletes, or we have situations in which if you're going to go work out, or if you're going to run a marathon or do something, you're going to load up on carbs before you do your activity because it gives you extra energy. So the carbs is the fastest to burn, okay? If we chose C, that's the opposite. As I said before, your high-fat meal stays the longest in your stomach, right? Carbs leave the quickest, high-fat stays the longest. Heartburn occurs when the cardiovascular system is in distress, stomach acid leaks into the esophagus, gastrointestinal enzymes work overtime, small meals are eaten. What do we think it is? Heartburn occurs when B, right? We said when our stomach is kind of too full and that acid and bile starts to go up, back up that tube, the esophagus, right? Then we get this feeling of yuck feeling. Which of the following statements is true about metabolism? Glycogen is used as a regulatory molecule. Fatty acids can be used to make glucose. Excess amino acids can be stored as body fat. Amino acids are stored in the liver as glycogen. So which do we think it is? Remember, now we're talking about our 3 macronutrients and what they break down to. What do we think it is? I hope you said C, right? So again, C, amino acids, anytime we're talking about AA or amino acids, we're talking about protein. And when we get excess calories from that protein and we don't use that or burn that energy off somehow, that becomes what we call adipose tissue or body fat, right? The others are incorrect. Fatty acids can be used to make glucose? No. That would be our starches. That would be carbohydrates, right? Our carbs are used to make glucose. All right, tip at the end of the chapter here is yogurt's good for you, but only if you're getting the right kind. So my daughter loves to get like Yoplait, not good, right? If you read the label, you're gonna see that those type of commercial yogurts have a whole lot of added sugars to them. But if you're getting some really clean, healthy sugar clean, healthy yogurt, when you read the labels without added sugars, they have some really good, again, live, different cultures in there that is good for our stomach, good for our gut. It's gonna do some good things for us, okay? So again, take the time to read through chapter 3 because it's very foundational as to how we can use the nutrients we eat. All right, we'll see you for chapter 4.